EPIC's remit to provide evidence-based scientific advice to Scottish Government is supported by access to relevant data. So in order to provide the best advice, we need to have timely access to the best available data. And this is livestock demographic data and movement data, and also disease-specific data and environmental data. And these are generally sourced from a variety of sources, so there may be public or private bodies. These could be government or industry bodies. And EPIC is quite unique in that it has a dedicated team of data scientists and data engineers that are responsible for all parts of the data management process. Could I have the next slide, please? Actually, that's not moving on. So yeah, we're responsible for all parts of the data management process. So from negotiating with data providers, and then organizing secure data transfer from their systems to ours, and then through to the secure delivery to our authorized users. The EPIC data repository itself is a resilient, secure system for data curation. But it's not just a case that we acquire the data and then lock it away until it's required. When it comes to us, it goes through a number of processes for data cleaning and analysis. We've developed a number of methods for processing the data so that we can add value and hopefully make the data more usable. We also try and provide documentation on data content that we have learned through the data processing, but also with conversations with our data providers. And of course, we have to be aware of security at all stages of the process, so that we are complying with legal requirements. So for example, that our systems are complying with industry standards, and also that our data use is complying with data protection regulations, GDPR, etc. Could I have the next slide, please? So why do we do all this? Well, data underpins a significant proportion of EPIC outputs. So if we want to provide evidence-based scientific advice, and if we want to be able to react quickly to a possible disease incursion in Scotland, then we need to be prepared with the most up-to-date, accurate, easily accessible data. And also, as the morning goes on, you will hear from a number of EPIC scientists on work they've completed in the last 6 years using data-driven science. So using either established data science techniques or developing ones for particular use. And these might be looking at, so for example, characterization of livestock movement networks, or identification of potential links between premises, or looking at where perhaps animals might interact with each other and so contribute to disease spread. And then also looking at analyzing historical data. So for example, for building models for disease spread. So perhaps looking at the likelihood of incursion, the patterns of spread, and the possible success or failure of control measures. And so the data repository has helped to support all of these activities. And it's also evolved throughout the lifetime of EPIC. So it's not just a vehicle for data curation. So for example, we've also added a platform for project management and collaboration. And we imagine going into the next EPIC, it will continue to grow and evolve. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Julie. We have time for a couple of questions if anybody wants to pose a question. If not, then we will move on to the next lightning talk, which is from Claire Hamilton, who is from the Morden Institute.
Thanks, Dom. So good morning, everyone. I work at the Morden Research Institute, and I'm one of the scientists that works on pathogen biology and epidemiology. There we go. So as Dom mentioned earlier, EPIC's mission is to deliver high quality scientific evidence to support the Scottish Government in the prevention of, the preparation for and the eradication of important animal diseases. But in order to do this, it's important that we have an understanding of pathogen biology and what impact that can have on pathogen transmission, epidemiology and emergence of disease. So the work in EPIC, which is interlinked with the Scottish Government Strategic Research Programme, has been a focus within EPIC for the last 6 years and will continue to be a focus going forward into EPIC 4. So why is pathogen biology important? Well, disease emergence and spread can depend on a number of factors that are linked to the infectious pathogen, the host and the environment. And as we all know too well from COVID-19, genetic variation and mutations can give rise to new strains or subtypes of pathogens, which can impact on their pathogenicity and virulence, which in turn can impact on transmission and epidemiology, and also affect vaccine and drug efficacy, which could potentially lead to new outbreaks or transmission events. So having detailed knowledge of pathogen biology and the interplay between host and environment is important not only to prevent disease outbreaks, but it's also important for establishing effective control and prevention strategies for the sustainable production and the safe trade of livestock. So we work on many different pathogens within EPIC, but we don't have long today. So just one example which highlights the importance of studying pathogen biology is bovine viral diarrhea virus. So BVD is an important disease of cattle and can have significant economic impact for farmers, as it can cause reproduction failure and production losses. Infection of naive cattle during pregnancy can give rise to persistently infected or PI animals, which are tolerant of the virus, but are a major source of infection both within and between herds. So the Scottish BVD eradication programme, which is supported by the Scottish Government, it began in 2010 and has led to a significant reduction in the number of virus-positive herds. However, in order to maintain those virus-free herds, it's crucial to avoid reinfection of animals, and that can involve a number of things, including implementation of tight biosecurity, but also having an understanding of the number and movement of PI animals in the population. So within EPIC, scientists use a molecular epidemiology approach to monitor the presence and transmission of virus subtypes in the population. And using serum samples which are submitted through the virus surveillance labs as part of the eradication scheme, they can sequence and identify subtypes of the virus. And then using location and movement data, they can identify clusters of similar samples that could indicate either outbreaks or possible chains of infection. And the importance of this type of work came to the fore recently during an outbreak of BVD in the Northern Isles. So the animals were identified during routine screening as part of the eradication programme, and then the Scottish Government asked EPIC to sequence those isolates as a matter of priority. And the results showed that the virus sequences from all the PI calves were highly similar, which would have suggested a single source of infection. And so these types of sequencing approaches are applicable to other pathogens, as you'll hear this afternoon, and they can be used to help identify new or emerging disease threats to livestock. They could identify potential sources of risk, or they can be linked to clinical data to inform on pathogen virulence. And this type of work will continue going forward into EPIC 4. So, thank you. Excuse me. I don't know if there are any questions. Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much, Roger Humphrey, SRC. With the phylogenetic work, most important, most efficacious?
Is that in relation to BVD specifically?
Yes.
Yeah, well, so that's not my area of expertise, unfortunately, but I don't know if maybe somebody who works on BVD, George, is that... So, is it in specific relation to BVD? Yeah, I don't know if they're... Oh, sorry, Sam, sorry, I didn't see you there.
Thank you very much for a lovely talk. In terms of whether you can unpick what might be important risk factor, I will mention this in the context of avian influenza in the next session, particularly in the context of how you might go about modelling, including that risk factor into the phylogenetic and phylodynamic analysis. But also just to say, yes, I am in fact using that same technique on the BVD sequences as well.
Thanks, Sam.
All right, if there are no further questions.
Right, thank you.
Move on again. Thank you very much, Claire. So our third speaker in this session is Theo Pepler from University of Glasgow. And again, he's joining us online. So he will now deliver his talk. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Theo Pepler and I'm a research scientist within EPIC. And today I'll be talking to you about animal movement analysis. Animal movement analysis is a very broad topic and underpins much of the work done within EPIC. As we saw in the COVID pandemic, the movement of infectious individuals plays a major role in disease spread. And similar principles apply to livestock movements. In fact, EPIC scientists made significant contributions to the work of the Scottish COVID-19 Response Consortium, using, for example, a foot and mouth disease model developed at the University of Glasgow. So what we are aiming with towards these models is a framework of flexible models using modular building blocks with which we can construct new models or models with new components very quickly. So you can think of these as bricks or like Lego bricks or building blocks, which you can quickly reorganize in whatever is most appropriate to the situation. So that will allow us to respond in a timely way to policy questions during a disease outbreak or outwith an outbreak. So the other good thing about that is it allows us to build robust data analysis pipelines with which we can keep track of input data, methods of analysis, and outputs, such as data visualizations that's set up in a standard way. This will form a big part of the work proposed for the next iteration of EPIC. It's one of the major challenges we identified. Then the other highlight from recent years is our work into unobserved links within and between animal movement networks. So in previous years, we worked at identifying Scottish premises that might play key roles in disease spread in future infectious disease outbreaks. Most recently, we looked at the key premises for linked networks, say the cattle and sheep network. And in this paper we published at the start of last year, we showed that links between the cattle movement network and the sheep network in Scotland affects to a significant extent which of the premises play the most important roles in the spread of disease. So the key point to take from that is that these unobserved links do matter, and that has implications for a project we're busy with at the moment, which is looking into cattle haulage trucks and how that might affect disease spread. So these cattle haulage trucks, they're quite large trucks that can take cattle from several farms, and they make different stops before, say, offloading the cattle at the market. And obviously having those cattle from different herds together in the same truck pose some risk for the transmission of infectious disease. Now the movements between the premises of the markets are recorded, but what is not yet recorded is the fact that these animals spend time together on those haulage trucks. So a key question from Scottish Government is whether it is worth installing radio frequency identification equipment on these haulage trucks and recording the data. So obviously that would depend on how prevalent the use of these trucks is currently, but also how it might change in the future, given the changing Scottish livestock industry. So how animals move affects how infectious disease pathogens might move. The better we understand animal movements, the better we can inform policy on how those movements might be reorganized to protect the Scottish livestock industry against disease outbreaks. Thank you for listening.
Thanks very much, Theo. I should have said that was a recorded presentation, and Theo is now available live to answer any questions if anybody has any.
So, apologies for not being there in person. I'm happy to take any questions.
Jackie Nicampros over there, please.
Hi Theo, thanks very much for your talk. Could you say a little more about plans for data pipelines, please, just so that we get a picture of what might be in the pipeline, so to speak?
Yes, in the COVID response consortium, we saw a good model for data pipelining, and if we think, well, the pipelines involve more than just data. It's also the analysis and then outputs, sort of reports and summary statistics, visualizations, etc. But a big hurdle in analyzing animal movement data is that it comes from different sources, and cleaning up the data and having it sort of a standard format that you can quickly analyze is a big challenge. So what we're thinking of is having some data preparation steps as part of the pipe, and just getting the data in a form that you can quickly, let's say, plug it into one model and then also in another model, and compare the results from these models, also in a standardized way. So I would say, maybe I'll summarize it by saying it's about getting the data in a standardized format while still getting the most information from the data, not just throwing away, say, part of the data just because it doesn't fit the box we want to get it in.
We have our first online question, and it's from Ali McAlpine, and it's for you, Theo. With regards to pipelines, can you say how this helped your work?
Well, up till now, when we did modeling and analysis of animal movement data, each pipeline was specific to a project. So I would build my own pipeline, but then someone else working on a different model would have a different pipeline. And these pipelines might not be compatible. Even the way we extract data from the EPIC repositories is not standard. So that creates some issues maybe with resilience as well, with staff resilience. So if I'm not there, it's a bit more difficult to use my models and use my data pipeline. I would say that's how it worked in the past in EPIC. We didn't have a consistent sort of central area to store models, get data through the pipeline, and get outputs. That also creates some problems, I would say, from the receiving end, because if policymakers need to first understand what the visualization means before they can understand the impacts of modeling, that's just an additional step that we don't need when time is short.
I think we must move on into interest of time. So there's clearly an interesting discussion there. Ian McKendrick is going to speak in the second session about the work of the Scottish COVID Response Consortium, which EPIC formed a part of, and I think we'll touch on some of these issues in a little more detail then. Thank you. So our next speaker, our fourth lightning talk, comes from Leanne Sutherland, who is from the James Hutton Institute. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm here on behalf of colleagues from the James Hutton Institute and SRUC, and we do the socioeconomic research, or most of it, within EPIC. So just some background around why the socioeconomic research is important. I sometimes refer to us as farmer whisperers. So it's about understanding how to speak farmer, what it is farmers are thinking about, why they're behaving the way they do, perhaps not necessarily the way we would like them to, with a view to thinking about how can we then kind of intervene and make a difference based on that understanding. The economic research is also important for understanding what the cost of a disease outbreak might be, and we'll give you an example. So this is just meant to be a whistle-stop tour. Just checking to be sure I'm on the right slide. So the first set of research I want to talk about are the studies that we did on backyard livestock keeping. So this is working with people who are hobby farmers or just kind of enthusiasts for particular breeds. We did a study on poultry, and then we did another one on swine, and we're just finishing up one on sheep. And it's been really interesting for looking at the biosecurity implications. And there's really good news. The good news is that they're very disconnected from our conventional mainstream herds. So the chance of cross-contamination between the two is very low, with one exception, and that's when you're looking at sheep and tups. So it's not unusual for someone who has a few sheep to borrow a tup from a commercial herd and then put that tup right in with the rest of the sheep. So you can imagine that that's certainly a biosecurity risk. In terms of knowledge, these hobby farmers are more likely to go to a veterinarian, but often will flummox a veterinarian by presenting one chicken, for instance. So it's a different level of veterinary service that they're looking for. They tend to be disconnected from your traditional agricultural knowledge and innovation system, so your typical communication channels. But there are other ways of communicating with them that have been very successful, particularly, for example, with Facebook. The second study, that was on the wrong slide. I moved ahead too far. I'll stay on this one then about the eradication of BVD. So just kind of complementary to what Claire was talking about this morning, we worked with farmers to find out, so, how are you responding? As you can imagine, there's a geographic difference in how they respond. So farmers that are closer to England are looking at the border, doing a lot of cross-border movements and thinking, well, how likely is it we're going to be able to realistically achieve eradication? Further north, what you're seeing is obviously there's been a fair bit of compliance. The 70% is great, but farmers are still reluctant to let go of that animal that they have a particular attachment to, whether it's an animal that's got a lot of breeding that they've put time into or has done a good job for their herd, and particularly if that animal looks perfectly healthy. Because farmers see themselves as caregivers and purveyors of healthy livestock and of knowing what a healthy animal looks like. And so if this animal looks healthy to them, then they're really reluctant to go against their better judgment to cull it, particularly when there's a big financial cost involved. More about economic costs, and this is coming from our colleagues at SRUC. So if you're looking at the cost of an outbreak, for instance, they have models that can estimate that. So the one that you can see in the graph here is about a potential African swine fever outbreak. And so what they're estimating is that if we had to cull, say, 20% of the pigs in Scotland, what you're going to have as a repercussion of that is about $2.5 million in loss to the sector, the agricultural sector, but a much, much bigger hit on the retailers, and it's not going to be compensated for in sales going the other direction. So that's the other side when you're looking at beef and lamb. Actually, the difference is quite marginal in terms of what you would expect there. It's fair to say both SRUC, particularly in EPIC, but also the Hutton, have been doing work on precision farming technologies and looking at uptake and how that's likely to work. And as you can imagine, there's some pretty obvious things that you can do. So working with stakeholders to build incentives, they've identified a number of different things. that we could do to help encourage farmers, but then also looking at who's getting the knowledge and who's actually making a change. So you can imagine, it stands to reason when you think about it, farmers with successors are more likely to invest in new technologies because they're investing in a new generation. Farmers who have taken up technologies in the past have that pattern and that relationship. But you also need to think about where a lot of this information is coming from. And that's where, when you think about input supply companies, for instance, they're supplying a lot of the precision farming equipment. They're actually quite often farmers' best source of advice. And with the best will in the world, these are companies. So they're going to focus on their best customers. So your bigger farms, your farmers that are located closer to them, the farmers that have bought technology in the past. So if you want to think about speeding up that process, then you want to think about farms with these indicators, so successors, for instance, who maybe aren't being reached by some of the input supply companies for other reasons, maybe because of where they're located, for instance, or because they're smaller scale, and think about aiming some interventions there. So there you have it. That is your whistle-stop tour of the socioeconomic research in EPIC. Questions? There's a hand waving at the back.
Sorry about the hand waving. Just wondering if maybe you could very briefly sort of indicate how you would, or how have you been articulating or integrating the more epidemiological aspects of I don't know, EPIC's work to this analysis that you just presented.
So how do we integrate with some of our data modelers and that sort of thing? Is that what you're...
If there's some sort of pipelining of those models onto or into some other framework downstream? Or
framework downstream. So are you asking about policy interface?
Well, that too, but how the epidemiological side of it is articulated to any kind of economic or social considerations that you're sort of contemplating. How do you work together?
Yeah, I'm struggling to follow. I mean, I can say I was really gratified a few weeks ago to hear Sheila speaking at a meeting in Aberdeenshire and talking about some of our backyard poultry work to a broader, the North East Scotland Agricultural Advisory Group. So it's terrific to see some of our pipeline in terms of how the information comes in and then goes back out again. Is that maybe what you're talking about?
Right, say in terms of modeling, like, okay, maybe I'm just like overextending here. Sorry, thank you.
So I think Sam may have a comment to say on that.
Thank you for your talk. I wonder, actually, could you expand a little bit more on when you said that some people don't believe the eradication will be successful, and whether there is something that we can do as EPIC to help that, partly to help, maybe some of our modelling would show that it might be successful, but then perhaps there is some further insights you can give us as to how best to present that work to people.
Okay. I mean, I can tell you that I didn't collect that data myself, so that's Orla Shorthall, who unfortunately is off work sick today. She was planning to be online, so I would have sent the question over her direction. From what I understand, it is often a geographical issue. I mean, farmers have a certain amount of fatalism anyway, and so we see that in some of the published academic literature on biosecurity, that they think that some disease is going to happen, and they just have, there's a certain amount of, it's just going to happen, and there's a bit of luck to it, which is a hard thing to combat with data. But I know in this study in particular, there's an issue with the farmers in southern Scotland, and they know that there's no eradication program in England, and they know that there's a lot of movement across that border. And so when they see that movement happening, and they know that they don't have the same impetus south of the border to make a difference, then they just, it raises doubts for quite obvious reasons about whether this is actually going to be successful or not. And then if it's not going to be successful, it's that whole, why should I make the sacrifice when other people aren't?
And Leanne, we have a question from an online delegate, and it's Ursula Kenny. Remove my face mask. And she's asking, how did you explore farmers' perceptions of the BD eradication programme?
How did we do it? I believe it was interviews, but we also did some interesting things around video. So we worked with farmers to produce some videos of their herds and their interactions with them. And part of that was getting a better sense of how farmers see their animals, because farmers quite often will look at an animal and be able to tell you whether it's looking healthy or not, but they can't necessarily tell you what it is that they're seeing. It's just a sense that they have, and it's more kind of intuitive, but also based in, decades probably of rearing livestock. So we did some work with video and then talking them through the video, which helps make that a bit more explicit to us and gives them more control over the interview situation, because they've taken the video of what they think is important. And so that tends to elicit more open responses than, as you can imagine, a lot of farmers are pretty defensive when you start asking them about why are you not doing something the government clearly thinks you should be doing. Sorry, there's another. I think we're maybe going over our question time.
Move on, and I'm sorry for those of you who have questions. We can, if there's time at the end of the session, we'll do that, and if not, then you can catch Leanne in the coffee break. Thank you very much. So our fifth lightning talk comes from Stephen Catterall, who is at BIOS.
Hi, I'm Stephen Catterall from BIOS, and I'm here to tell you a bit about EPIC's work on animal disease modelling. So, what is a model? Well, in this context, and without getting too philosophical, a model is a representation of some aspect of animal disease that combines data, knowledge, and assumptions to produce some kind of useful output. And most of EPIC's models for animal disease are mathematical, and they're implemented in the form of a computer program. So our models aim to be policy relevant and to make the best use of available data. Many of you will have heard of the fact that African swine fever is spreading westwards through Europe over the last few years and is now on our doorstep. EPIC has been preparing for this. We've developed models for the spread of African swine fever between pig farms in Scotland in order to assess the risk of an outbreak given introduction into different parts of Scotland. And the modelling shows that identifying the disease before it spreads across large parts of the country is going to be of key importance. Wild boar populations across Eastern Europe have been severely impacted by both African swine fever related mortality and also culling. Transmission of African swine fever in wild boar, it's important to understand in order to interpret the patterns of spread that we're observing across Europe. EPIC has been making use of disease case reports from wild boar in Eastern Europe to sort of develop models for the spread of African swine fever in wild boar populations. And these disease case reports are quite challenging to interpret because there's a lot of uncertainty about the actual distribution of the wild boar in Eastern Europe. A very different kind of modelling is modelling the uptake by farmers of a new diagnostic test for sheep scab. And this EPIC work has shown, amongst other things, that farmer uptake of such a new test would depend on both the farmers' perceived risk from sheep scab and also how much they value some near-term rather than longer-term sort of benefits. So, looking to the future, I think we'll obviously we'll have to handle modelling of new diseases, using generic approaches where possible, so as to avoid starting from nothing when we're faced with a new disease. I think that modelling is a very powerful tool, and we need to explore applications that go beyond typical questions surrounding disease transmission. So, for example, that farmer uptake of sort of test modelling I mentioned earlier. And to do all this, we need up-to-date and relevant data, and also the ability to deploy models quickly if that's necessary. So these are all ongoing challenges EPIC is working on right now. So I hope that's given you just a taste of the kind of work on animal disease modelling going on in EPIC at the moment. Thank you. So, yeah, if anyone's got any questions. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. I was just going to ask, are these models published on EPIC's website?
There's certainly some material on the EPIC website. Yes, if you have a look for example, that's African swine fever. The farmer uptake of the test modelling that has been published in a paper. So yes, it should be available. Thanks.
Right. Thank you very much, Stephen. We'll move on to the next.
Can we take one more question?
Oh, sorry, please do. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry about that. Stephen, really nice brief overview. Just somewhat sort of provocative and sort of semantic question, but I'm always conscious of the extent to which we're modelling when we model whether we're modelling diseases or we're modelling farms, and I'm sort of conscious of running models where we say here's a point location and there's 2,000 sheep at this location and modelling it based on that.
Yeah.
Any thoughts to sort of future work potentially sort of modelling the sort of the actual production transmission within the production systems and sort of taking into account the real structure of farms and the real structure of production systems? And sorry, because I know that there's an incredible amount of work to be done on modelling, so sorry for asking if you want to know a bit more.
I mean, it's yes, I think it's not unusual in some models to kind of consider a farm to be a sort of point location where there are, as you say, sort of 2,000 sheep or something like that. But yeah, definitely it would be good to have models that think of farms more realistically as covering a sort of larger sort of spatial area. But yeah, I think that's very much sort of in development. It's a work in progress, I guess.
Great. Thank you very much. Right. And so to the last presentation of this session, the last lightning talk, which comes from Amy Jennings, who is at the University of Edinburgh. Thanks, Amy.
I was just wondering where the gadget was that you were all using to move the slides on. It was a bit of a mystery to me. This is a talk concentrating on knowledge and policy exchange, and I need to fess up, I am no expert in this, so this is a bit of a personal reflection. So, EPIC's business arguably could be said to be knowledge exchange with policymakers, stakeholders, and the wider public. And I recently read an article about knowledge exchange that highlighted the idea of knowledge with ignorance exchange or mobilisation. And this resonated as I reflected this might be the bit that's been lost along the way during the pandemic as our personal and professional lives got moved into the online world. So this is a brief personal reflection on what EPIC and its network might be able to carry forwards from this natural experiment. I only experienced 6 months of normal EPIC before I was posted to my bedroom. And it was my expectation that this new normal would have had a profoundly negative effect on my relationship building. But really, the national lockdown for me was not an experience of professional isolation. EPIC has always used remote meetings, but the systems we used were bad. The awful teleconference system was scratchy, and as a newbie, I found it really hard to know who was talking and from where. Teams and Zoom and all the other varieties of video conferencing have been a big improvement for me on this, and these meeting formats have allowed me to connect better with colleagues that I'd not yet been able to meet in person. Additionally, with the increased social acceptability of talking on Teams, I was able to connect more easily with Scottish Government colleagues. I could see people talking, and this meant that I was quickly able to build the network of relationships that has allowed me to get things done, thus shortening the pathway that we've had between policymaker to researcher and back. It became easier to schedule meetings because people were travelling less, and therefore exchange happened faster and, in my opinion, in a more coordinated way. And I hope that the acceptability and accessibility of online meetings may have democratised EPIC a bit, with more people having access to a wider network and more easily. Those who live 200 miles away were now as close as those I once sat next to in an office. The tighter network must also only have helped interdisciplinary research, providing opportunities for a holistic team response to policy questions. And I hope that this has been the experience for many in EPIC and in Scottish Government, that more EPIC members have been able to have more contact with more Scottish Government colleagues. And through this time, EPIC and the wide network associated with it has exchanged knowledge effectively to support policymakers with their decision making. And here are a few examples. A report on the network links between pig farms was completed and has been extremely valued by policymakers and well communicated across stakeholders. We've managed to respond in a coordinated fashion during 2 outbreaks of avian influenza, providing veterinary risk assessments and rapid review for the APHA. And a successful piece of work with smallholder farmers was completed through online interviews and was delivered and warmly received by policymakers and the smallholder community. So on reflection, my communication within a multi-centre consortium has improved over this strange period. So therefore, maybe EPIC shouldn't worry about face-to-face meetings. Maybe we don't need that presence in the Scottish Government offices. Maybe this conference is a waste of our time, the space, the carbon. There is some truth, or at least a balance to be set in the above examples, and I do believe that there's much we can carry forward from the national lockdown, but I think we've also lost something along the way. And I believe that that thing might be ignorance mobilisation. Without the passing chats, the idle conversations before the starts of meetings, the overheard snippets, the face-to-face encounters with stakeholders, I think that we might have missed the holes. The bits where the message is lost, the subtle thing that a farmer mentions that you hadn't even thought about. And that is why these face-to-face encounters are so valuable for research, for knowledge exchange, and for research for policy. So let's keep zooming, but let's also remember the value of face-to-face in both knowledge exchange and ignorance mobilisation. Thanks very much. And apologies for that, you can blame Kim. Ooh, got off lightly, brilliant. Oh.
Thanks for the talk. So I just wanted to ask, what was your role during avian influenza season for APHA?
So I personally work in Topic 1, but EPIC, as really our role has been as part of the Five Nations Veterinary Risk Assessment Group. So we have quite a close working relationship with both those in Scottish Government, within APHA and within DEFRA. So one of my colleagues goes to the, I can never remember what the acronym is, it's NEAG, so it's the National Epidemiology Group meetings. Colleagues also go to the bird table meetings and the stock take meetings, and that allows EPIC to have an understanding of what's going on, and then when we are asked, usually to do rapid risk assessments, we're then able to do those reasonably quickly and know the people. Also last year we did a sort of real-time review of the risk assessments that were being written by APHA, and sat down and basically built a structure where we were able to quickly see where the holes were, and also which risk assessments consistently risk assessing. So we created a large bank which was used by the APHA to help them review.